The air was thick humming with anticipation. Not a word had been spoken, and yet, everything between us had already been said. You know those moments, right? The ones that don't ask for words because they already carry too much inside them. This was one of those nights. We had just gotten back from a drive, one of those long, winding, soul-sorting kinds of drives. No music, no chatter. Just the rhythm of the road and all the things we weren't saying filling up the space between us. Outside, the rain had just started. Soft, steady, almost like it didn't want to interrupt. The trees were still holding onto the last colors of autumn, burnt orange, deep crimson, that kind of moody gold that only shows up when summers finally let go. Inside the cabin, everything felt still, not frozen, just waiting. There was a fire crackling low in the stone hearth, throwing shadows across the walls. I remember the smell of cedar and something warm and spiced on the stove. I'd lit a candle out of habit, not realizing how that tiny flame would feel like a spotlight in the quiet. He walked in first, set the keys down, took off his coat. No rush, no urgency. And I just stood there, watching him like I was seeing him for the first time and remembering him all at once. You know what I mean? It wasn't awkward. It wasn't even shy. It was something else entirely. Something deeper, slower, thicker. Like we were standing on the edge of a moment that neither of us dared name just yet. And the thing is, it wasn't supposed to be like this. This weekend was planned, yeah, but for rest, for space, for a little escape from the noise of everything else. What I didn't expect was to feel so much in the quiet. Funny how silence can speak louder than any confession. I could feel him behind me, even when he wasn't touching me. His presence always had that effect, warm and steady, like gravity, pulling me closer without asking. And I was trying to act normal, trying to pretend I didn't feel my skin buzzing under my sweater or that my heart wasn't skipping every third beat. But I did. I felt everything, and I knew he did too. We hadn't talked about it. Not really. But over the last few weeks, there had been a shift. A glance held too long. A touch that lingered just enough to be noticed. The kind of closeness that makes you ache because you can't name it, but you can't ignore it either. This wasn't just about physical attraction. It was emotional, spiritual, something old and new at the same time. He poured himself a glass of wine, sat down on the worn leather couch like he'd been waiting for me to follow him there since the day we met. And still no words. But the moment was loud. That kind of loud that lives in your chest and makes your fingertips tingle. So I sat beside him. Close, but not close enough to touch. Not yet. I didn't want to break whatever spell had found us here. You ever feel like that? Like time standing still for a reason you don't fully understand yet, but you know something's about to change? Yeah, that was this night. And no, it wasn't how I thought this weekend would go. Not even close. But somehow it was exactly what I needed. If you've ever felt something unspoken between you and someone else, a tension you couldn't explain but couldn't walk away from, either stay with me. This story isn't about scandal. It's about connection. It's about the kind of truth that doesn't need words. Subscribe to Sheila Hart Tales for more stories that speak to what words never quite can. You're safe here. Let's begin. I stood up first, slowly, trying not to make it feel like a decision. Just something to do with my hands. I walked over to the small kitchen tucked into the corner of the cabin. It was dim, warm, rustic. Familiar. A place that felt like it had held secrets before ours. I reached for the kettle, turned the knob on the gas stove, and let the silence stretch as the flame caught with a soft whoosh. He followed me. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Heard the way he didn't rush them. Felt the shift in the air when he came to stand just behind me, not touching, but there. Fully. Steady. I didn't move. I didn't need to. My breath slowed and then quickened again, all in the space of a second. It was the awareness. You know? That crackling electricity when someone's presence wraps around you without even trying. I felt it in the base of my spine. In the tiny hairs at the back of my neck that rose like they were listening too. I reached into the cabinet for 2 mugs, fingers shaking just a little. Not because I was scared, but because I knew this wasn't innocent. Not anymore. Not when we were this close. Not when the air between us felt more like a dare than a distance. He leaned in, just slightly, and reached above me for the honey jar on the top shelf. And in that moment, his chest brushed my back. Just lightly. Just enough. But it was everything. I didn't step away. I didn't speak. I just stood there, letting the contact settle into my skin like heat from the fire. Letting myself feel it. His arm came down slowly, and as he shifted, his hand grazed my lower back fingers, soft and intentional, like maybe he was pretending it was accidental, but we both knew it wasn't. Not really. And that touch, that lingering touch, it sent every coherent thought I had scattering like ashes on the hearth. Just a second. Just long enough to make me forget everything else. Where I was. What this meant. What line we hadn't just stepped toward but stepped over. The kettle began to hum, the sound rising steadily, but even that felt far away. All I could hear was my own heartbeat and the slight catch in my breath when I finally turned to face him. And when I did, when our eyes met, there was nothing playful or teasing in his expression. Nothing vague. It was quiet hunger. Not desperate. Not demanding. Just a silent knowing. Like he'd been holding this back for months, maybe longer, and wasn't sure how much longer he could. I handed him one of the mugs, and our fingers touched again. It wasn't an accident this time. We both held on longer than we needed to. We both felt it. There was nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. No kiss. No confessions. Just shared air. Shared heat. Shared tension that had taken on a life of its own. He leaned back against the counter, sipping slowly. Watching me. Not in a way that made me self-conscious, but in a way that made me feel seen. Like he was cataloging every part of this moment because it mattered to him just as much as it mattered to me. And me? I leaned against the opposite side. Cradled my mug. Tried to look away, couldn't. My body felt too aware. My skin too tight. Like every nerve had woken up just to memorize this, the way his eyes lingered at my lips when I sipped. The way the firelight danced across his face, softening him, sharpening everything between us. I didn't need him to say anything. I didn't want him to. Words would have only made it real. And we weren't ready to admit that. Not yet. So instead we stood there, letting silence wrap around us again. Letting the tension breathe. Letting the fantasy take root right in the middle of something so ordinary it should have been forgettable. But I knew then I'd remember this moment for the rest of my life. The tea. The fire. The weight of his gaze. The shape of that almost touch. It wasn't the start of something. It was something. Already. And neither of us was pretending anymore. We stayed there for a while, letting the steam from our mugs rise between us like something sacred, something neither of us wanted to break too quickly. He was the first to speak. "You're quiet tonight." His voice was low. Careful. Like he was testing the weight of the words before handing them to me. Not accusing, just noticing. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, really looked, and let the silence stretch a little longer. Not out of hesitation, but out of honesty. I wanted to give him the truth. The real one. Not the kind we hide behind when it's easier to pretend nothing's changed. "I don't feel like I'm just quiet," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like something's shifting." He didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Just kept watching me, like he already knew what I was going to say, but needed to hear me say it out loud. "We've been dancing around something," I continued. "Haven't we?" There was no accusation in my tone. No blame. Just a soft invitation to tell the truth we'd both been circling for longer than either of us probably wanted to admit. He exhaled slowly. Set his mug down on the counter without taking his eyes off me. And when he finally spoke again, it wasn't smooth. It wasn't planned. It was real. "I've been afraid." That was all he said at first. And just hearing those words, him, the one who always seemed so steady, so sure, admit fear, it undid something in me. In the best way. Afraid? I asked gently. He nodded, slowly. Yeah, he said, afraid that if I name this, if I say it out loud, I'll ruin whatever we've been building. That maybe it's better to leave some things unspoken. His voice broke just a little on that last line. And I felt it all the way in my chest. Because I knew what he meant. The fear of crossing a line and not being able to go back. The fear of losing something quiet and beautiful just because it wanted to become something louder, something more. But I also knew we weren't unspoken anymore. Not really. Not after tonight. He took a half step toward me. Just one. Enough to close the space, but not so much that it felt like a decision. He looked at me, eyes soft, almost pleading, and said something I'll never forget. Sometimes I think if I ever touch you the way I want to. He paused, swallowed, and his voice dropped lower. I won't be able to stop. It didn't feel like a threat. It didn't even feel like temptation. It felt like truth. Raw, heavy, sacred. I could hear the crackle of the fire behind him. The storm had picked up just slightly, tapping harder against the glass like the night itself was leaning in to listen. I looked at him for a long time, let his words sink into the spaces where I'd kept my own longings locked up. And then softly, honestly, without fear, I answered, "What if I don't want you to?" There it was. No games. No coyness. No excuses. Just two people, standing in the middle of a moment they'd been walking toward for what felt like forever, finally saying what needed to be said. He didn't move right away. He just let the silence settle again. Let it hold us both while the weight of what we'd just admitted hung between us. And then, he smiled. Not wide. Not smug. Just relieved. Like he'd been holding his breath for months and was finally letting it go. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever came next, whatever lines we crossed, it wouldn't be reckless. It would be real. And it would mean something. He hadn't moved. Not really. Still standing near the counter, hands braced behind him like he needed the wood to hold him up. But his eyes, they were different now. Open in a way that made my breath catch. Like he was finally peeling back a part of himself he'd never shown anyone. Not fully. And I saw it, that flicker of hesitation. That fear of breaking something delicate, something fragile and too important to lose. There's something, he started, voice quiet. I stayed still. Let him speak on his own time. He ran a hand over his jaw, glanced at the fire, then back at me. His mouth opened, then closed again. Swallowed. Braced. There's something I've imagined, he said again, more firmly now. Over and over. But I never thought you'd be open to it. I tilted my head just slightly. My heart started to pick up again, not from fear, but from anticipation. I didn't know what he was about to say, but I knew it mattered. Tell me. Just 2 words. Soft. Without pressure. But I meant them. Because whatever it was, I wanted to understand it. Him. He exhaled slowly. That deep kind of breath that feels like it's pulling something out of your chest you've buried for too long. It's not just about you and me, he said. It's about someone else too. My eyebrows lifted, just slightly, but I didn't speak. Didn't jump to any conclusion. I let the quiet hold the weight until he was ready. A woman, he added. Someone who knows you. And, just like that, my stomach fluttered. Not from discomfort. From something else. My mind tried to piece it together. 100 questions forming at once, but none of them pushing their way out. Because underneath the surprise there was something else. Curiosity. Intrigue. The slow, steady burn of a door creaking open in my imagination that I didn't even know was there. You want to watch? I began, carefully. My voice barely above a whisper. Me with her. He shook his head almost immediately. Stepped closer. No, he said softly. That's not it. His voice was so gentle, it almost broke something in me. I don't just want to watch, he continued. I want to see you feel. Everything. Everything you've ever wanted. Everything you've ever held back or told yourself you didn't deserve. He paused, and then added, so quietly I almost missed it. Even if it's not just from me. I didn't know what I expected him to say, but it wasn't that. That wasn't about lust, or control, or some careless fantasy. It was deeper than that, rooted in something more emotional, more selfless. Like he was offering me permission I hadn't even asked for but maybe had always wanted. And I didn't know what stunned me more, the confession itself, or how seen I felt in that moment. There was no shame in his voice, no threat, no insecurity. Just love. Love that was willing to stretch. Love that wasn't afraid to challenge the borders of tradition if it meant freeing me, letting me take up space in ways I never had before. I didn't answer right away. I let my mind wander. Let the image take shape, even though it felt foreign at first. A woman. Her. Someone who knew me. Someone who could reach me in places even he couldn't. I felt the tension rise in my chest. Not fear, but possibility. Was this something I could actually allow? Was it something I'd want? And if I did, what would that say about me? But in that moment, looking at him, I didn't feel judged. I felt held. Like he had already made peace with this long before he ever said it out loud. Like this wasn't about losing me. It was about offering me something more. And slowly, so slowly, I felt my guard begin to drop. My body relax. My heart open, just a little wider. Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the kind of reveal meant to shatter what we had. Maybe it was meant to expand it. And the part of me that had always stayed quiet, she started to whisper back. I stepped away from him, quietly, almost like I needed to catch my breath in a place where words couldn't follow. The kitchen faded behind me as I moved toward the window, my fingertips brushing the cool glass. Outside, the night was dark and blurred by the steady rain. The world felt distant and small compared to the storm of thoughts swirling inside me. I leaned my forehead against the pane and closed my eyes, trying to steady the rapid pulse in my chest. Was I hurt? No, not really. That wasn't it. Surprised? Absolutely. But more than anything, intrigued more than I wanted to admit. Because his words kept echoing in my mind, over and over. Someone else, a woman who knows you, I want to see you feel everything you deserve. I could almost hear her voice. The memory of her smile. The way her laughter used to ripple through the room like a secret. Flashes of past moments came unbidden, those subtle glances across the room, the accidental brushes of hands that lingered a heartbeat too long. We'd shared something. Something electric and undeniable, even if it was never spoken aloud. And now, that unspoken chemistry was suddenly more than a memory. It was a possibility. But then the other thoughts crept in. The quiet, insistent fears. What if I liked it too much? What if it changed everything? What if the lines I thought were clear suddenly blurred? I swallowed hard, because if I let myself imagine that, what did that mean for us? For the quiet nights we'd treasured? For the way we'd held each other close like a shield against the world? Would this invitation, this opening of doors I never expected, break something fragile and precious? Or would it build something new and stronger? The fear was real. The hesitation was real. But underneath it all, a deeper truth whispered. That maybe some boundaries are meant to be challenged. Maybe some desires are meant to be explored. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to find out. I stayed there by the window longer than I expected, letting the rain wash away the doubts, while the heat from the fire behind me reminded me I wasn't alone in this. Because whatever came next, I wasn't afraid anymore. Not completely. Not yet. I turned away from the window and walked back toward him slowly, deliberately. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't rush to fill the silence with promises or explanations. I just stood there, close enough to feel his breath, but far enough to remind us both that I was still deciding where I stood. And then, finally, I spoke. This wasn't just your fantasy anymore. My voice was calm, controlled. Like I was telling myself as much as I was telling him. Now it's mine too. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a declaration. Because in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about him wanting something and me quietly giving in. This was about me claiming a part of myself I'd kept hidden. A part I'd never let see the light of day before. I looked him in the eyes. Really looked. And I said, if we're going to explore this, then it has to be on my terms. Not because I wanted to control him. Not because I wanted to complicate things. But because this was my journey now. And I wasn't willing to lose myself along the way. There was a new power in that decision. A quiet strength. I could feel it settle in my bones, like I was stepping into a space I'd been avoiding, one filled with both risk and possibility. I didn't know exactly where this would lead. I didn't have a roadmap or a plan. But I knew this. Whatever happened next, I was choosing it. Not because someone else wanted it for me, but because I wanted it for myself. And as he reached out tentatively toward my hand, I let him take it. But on my terms, because this was mine. All of it. The days that followed felt like time itself had slowed down, stretching each moment, pulling the quiet anticipation taut between us. There were no rushed conversations. No declarations shouted in the daylight. Just subtle signs. Small gestures layered with meaning. A text message, brief and deliberate. A glance that held longer than usual. A silence that wasn't empty, it was full of everything we hadn't said. One evening, after a long day where the world outside felt dull and gray, he left something on the bed for me to find. A simple note, written in his careful hand. Be home by 8 tonight. No questions. Just trust me. I stared at those words, heart pounding in my chest like it wanted to break free. The clock's hands seemed to mock me, tick, tick, each second louder than the last. I found myself pacing the room, the air thick with possibilities. Lighting candles. 1, 2, 3. Their flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, warm, unpredictable, alive. I stood before the mirror, fingertips trembling slightly as I chose what to wear. Not too much. Not too little. Something that whispered confidence without shouting it. Every fiber of my being felt heightened, the brush of fabric against my skin, the faint scent of perfume mixing with the cool night air. My breath caught with every heartbeat, slow and steady but impossible to ignore. I could feel his presence before he even walked through the door. The night wasn't just coming, it was arriving, heavy with promise and unspoken truths. And I wasn't just waiting for him. I was waiting for the moment when everything would change, because tonight nothing would be the same again. When he opened the door, she was already there. Not waiting nervously or pacing the room, but standing quietly, poised like she belonged to the shadows and the light all at once. Her eyes were warm, deep pools that held stories, secrets, and a calm kind of strength. There was a knowing smile on her lips, not teasing, not challenging, but welcoming. She didn't take up space. She simply was. And that presence, it grounded me, steadied the rush of emotions twisting in my chest. We exchanged glances, soft, slow. Not a word was spoken, but in that look, there was an unspoken agreement. A shared understanding of what tonight could be. Before anything else, our hands found each other's. Her fingers grazed mine, delicate, almost shy. Not possessive. Not forceful. Just an invitation. And I accepted it. That simple touch sent a ripple through me, electric and calming at the same time. The air between us thickened, heavy with anticipation but never rushed. Our breaths mingled quietly, measured. Her gaze held mine, not demanding, but inviting me to explore. I could feel the energy building, not frantic or overwhelming, but charged, respectful, alive. He stood back, watching, not with ownership or control, but with awe and tenderness. His eyes never left me, but they weren't hungry. They were full. Full of trust. Full of something deeper than just physical need. Tonight wasn't about possession. It was about connection. And in that moment, I felt it, the slow unfolding of something I'd only ever dreamed of. Where boundaries softened. Where hearts opened. And where all three of us could simply be. Not perfect. Not certain. But utterly present. That night, words weren't needed. Because every glance, every breath, every subtle touch spoke volumes. And I knew this was just the beginning. In that room, the world contracted until nothing existed but the three of us, a space suspended between time and expectation. Every touch felt like permission, like a whispered yes from somewhere deep inside me that I'd been waiting for without even knowing. His hands, gentle, reverent, traced the lines of me as if discovering something sacred. I could feel the awe in his eyes, not just desire, but a kind of worship for this new me stepping forward more whole, more alive than I'd ever been before. And her, she moved with a grace that didn't seek to compete or claim. Instead, she was an anchor, an affirmation. Every brush of her skin, every glance, was an unspoken promise. You are safe here. You are seen. I wasn't just touched. I was seen. I was understood. Like the pieces of me that had long been hidden were finally held tenderly, without judgment. There was no jealousy, no confusion, no fear, just connection. A single emotional space held together by trust, where boundaries dissolved into something fluid and real. And in that unity, I felt something profound, something that went beyond the physical. It was intimacy in its purest form, where our breaths synchronized. Our hearts echoed each other's rhythms. And every look, every sigh, every movement told a story of acceptance and belonging. It wasn't a triangle. It wasn't a battle. It was a trinity, three souls weaving together, fragile and fierce all at once. And in that moment, I knew that what we'd found wasn't just desire. It was something far rarer. Something that would change me forever. The night slowly unraveled, and with it came the gentle closing of a chapter one never thought I'd write. She slipped away quietly, no fanfare, no rush, just a soft goodbye, a look that said everything words couldn't. The door closed behind her, and suddenly the room felt vast again. But the space between us wasn't empty. He and I sat wrapped in a blanket, the fabric warm against our skin, cocooning us in a fragile new kind of closeness. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full of everything we'd shared and everything we still needed to understand. And then he murmured, low and honest, "Thank you." The kind of thank you that carries weight. The kind of thank you that means more than just words. More than you know. I looked at him and saw not just relief or desire, but gratitude. And somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. Because for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, I felt completely myself. Not for him, not for her, but for me. That night, I didn't just cross a line. I stepped into a space where I could finally breathe, where I could be seen, where I could be whole. And it was terrifying and beautiful all at once. Because sometimes, the most daring thing we can do is simply be ourselves. And in that truth, I found freedom. We spend so much time trying to explain who we are, trying to fit ourselves into neat little boxes that the world understands. But sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we never say out loud. The ones that live quietly in the spaces between words. Have you ever had a desire you didn't dare name? Something unspoken, something that changed you, maybe forever? If this story touched something inside you, something raw, real, or beautifully complicated, I invite you to subscribe to Sheila Hart Tales. Here we share the stories that live in those silent spaces, the ones that don't always have easy answers. Like, comment, and share if you've ever longed for something that defies explanation. Because sometimes, it's in those quiet, complicated places that we find the deepest parts of ourselves.